In this module, we're going to talk about blockchain used for the movement of value. So we're going to talk about something old, something new. Blockchains are just a mechanism to transfer value represented by cryptocurrency tokens and ledger entries. They use existing technology like networking, distributed databases, technology, and cryptography, but that's not new. However, the way that it's being used and combined is new. And I'm not going to get into sort of a long dissertation on money, other than money has been around for a long time, right? We started bartering with it. Then when the Europeans started going to China, instead of bringing these big, heavy things to barter and trade with, they ended up creating script. And then eventually governments got into issuing money, and they started coining. And now when they didn't have enough coins, they would devalue the coins by mixing the precious metals with copper and other forms of metal. But the case of governments issuing money and devaluing the money essentially is not anything new. It's been going on for a long time. There have been several reserve currencies over the history of money. Those monies typically will last about 100 years or so. There's a number of things that cause one reserve currency to fall to another. We'll cover that in the banking and finance course. But the most important thing to understand is that money typically serves four functions. Some people would argue five. It serves as a medium of exchange, a measure of value, a standard of deferred payment, and a store of value. And then some people would argue that it's also a means of control. And so what we see happening historically is, the single money like the dollar would necessarily have to function in all the four or five of those ways. However, what we're seeing with the advent of cryptocurrency is that you might have a cryptocurrency that's really good as a store of value, but may not be that good as a medium of exchange, right? So for example, if I'm going to essentially buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks or at a local coffee shop, I may not need 51% of all the computers in the world to validate that transaction, right? Or it might not be a great store of value if it fluctuates wildly. It might be a great store of value long term, right? So for example, if you had a dollar in 2009, bought 500 bitcoins, and that dollar would be worth many millions. Those 500 bitcoins would be worth many millions of dollars over a 2-year plus life cycle. Clearly, it's a great store of value, but from week to week or month to month, maybe not, right? When it can lose so much of its value in a short period of time. The question is, how good is the dollar or fiat currency as a store of value if the government can come in and essentially seize it? If they can send a note to the bank and tell the folks at the bank, hey, this person's account, we want you to freeze that account, right? Or how good is it as a medium of exchange if a government can tell you this is who you can and cannot do business with? These people are on a terrorist watch list, whatever. So every money, cryptocurrency, while it has advantages, it also has disadvantages, right? So let's talk about cryptocurrency. What we're seeing potentially with different cryptocurrencies is they might be really good at one or more of those functions, but not that good at others. And what our technology allows us to do is on our phone, if we're going to make a transaction, let's say we're going to buy a car or we're going to buy a candy bar, our phone, if it had a number of different tokens or cryptocurrencies in it, could actually decide which token or cryptocurrency to use based on the amount, based on whatever fees or costs are involved, based on the risk, based on the amount of time it takes for finality of the transaction. And so, I could be in a world where I'm storing my value in Bitcoin, but when I go into a store, I live in Fairfax County, when I go in a store, I might use Fairfax coin, right? Because there might be some advantages to use that coin or token. So what we're actually seeing is potentially the fractionalization of money, right? And almost to a degree, a redefinition of money. But blockchain is allowing us to sort of reevaluate and rethink how money actually operates. So let's talk about blockchain in terms of movements of value. So we're going to talk about tokens, securities, currencies, the ecosystem, the technology framework, business framework, economic framework, which we refer to as tokenomics, and regulatory framework. So it's important to understand that blockchains use digitized representations of value to process the transference of value from one owner to another, and to avoid the double spend problem. These are typically done through tokens, and there's two types of tokens. There's a fungible token and a non-fungible token. So the term NFTs have become really popular lately. Here's the basic idea about the difference between fungible and non-fungible. A fungible token is interchangeable with another token, and they both represent the same value, right? They're basically the same. So you could argue that a dollar is fungible in that, or let's say a nickel or a dime or a quarter is fungible because one quarter is essentially the same as another quarter. Whereas a non-fungible token might be something like a deed to a property. It could be a game token that's unique. So for example, CryptoKitties was very popular, where each token represented a different color or style of cat, right? Or artwork, where each token represents a unique piece of artwork. So those would all be referred to as non-fungible, meaning each token is unique in its value and presentation. Whereas a fungible token is like a Bitcoin or a dollar, where each token is essentially equivalent to another token. I'm not saying exactly the same, because even if you take a dollar bill, each dollar bill has a unique serial number. So some people would argue that dollars are not necessarily fungible, but from a value perspective, they're completely fungible. Right? Now, again, and we've seen this slide before, but it's important to revisit it. A digital asset is anything that exists in a binary format and comes with the right to use. Right? Data that do not possess that right are not considered assets. Digital assets include, but are not exclusively limited to, things like intellectual property. And again, this is not just the videos and audio recordings, but it could be inventions, artwork, books, any kind of writing, anything that represents intellectual property. Financial instruments, stocks, bonds, currencies, any kind of records, right? And this could be a school records, it could be a driver's record, it could be certificates, ownership, education permits, any kind of licenses. All of those things potentially could be digital assets, or sometimes referred to as tokens. Now, when we talk about tokens, when people say tokens, they're usually referring to utility tokens, right? A token is a broad term, but usually it's referred to as utility tokens. And a utility token is used within a closed community. Typically, they're not exchanged for currency. They typically represent a service or usage right, and rewards programs like airline miles, hotel points are typical examples of utility tokens. You're not going to take your airline miles or hotel miles and go down to the grocery store and buy your groceries with it. However, you can use them to buy airfare, right, or hotel stays. Those are the basic ideas behind utility tokens. Now, security token, and the reason why we're talking about utility tokens and security tokens is because legally they're handled very different. And if you're building a blockchain solution or engaging with a blockchain solution that has a token, it's very important that you understand the difference of whether that token is considered by the law to be a securities token or utility token. Because everything about how you interface with that token, well, I can't say everything, but many things will change depending on whether it's a security or utility. Now, a security is an asset that is expected to appreciate over time. And it appreciates in value independent of the asset owner. So a company's stock is an example, right? You might buy a stock of Apple or Microsoft, and you have an expectation that the value of that stock is going to go up, not because of anything you did, but because of things that other people are doing. Now, cryptocurrency typically has three properties. It requires using a computer program in order to view, send, or receive money. The computer program uses cryptography to create and verify transactions. And the state of cryptocurrency ownership is determined by some consensus of computers who are sharing transaction information and following the same code. When we say following the same code, they're essentially following the same protocol. Now, there's many different types of cryptocurrencies, and each one has very different technical and performance parameters, characteristics, block times, transaction volumes, transaction costs. All of these factor into the tokenomics, which impact the supply and demand of those. And we'll cover that here shortly. So cryptocurrencies typically fall into three main categories, and I laugh when I say this. Traditional cryptocurrency, and I've got a note here, it's hard to think of any cryptocurrency as traditional. But generally you're talking Bitcoin, maybe Ethereum when you're talking about traditional cryptocurrencies. And then altcoins, right? And altcoins and privacy coins, these are anything other than the traditional. Privacy coins are actually a special category. What a privacy coin does is it makes it very difficult to know the history of the transactions. It'll scramble or tumble transaction history, right? Either the addresses, or in a block, you might have a bunch of inputs and you might have a bunch of outputs, but you have no idea, because the inside is sort of scrambled, how the inputs connect to the outputs. And then tokens, and again, we're generally referring to utility tokens is a different type of cryptocurrency. So let's talk a little bit about the ERC standard. So in Ethereum, there's occasionally there is a desire to make a change to the protocol. And when somebody wants to make a change to the protocol, what they generally will do is they'll make a proposal, and they might ask people to comment on it. And ERC stands for the Ethereum Request for Comment. And there's been a lot of them. Here we're going to talk about ERC 20 in just a minute. But when somebody wants to make a change to the protocol, they put out a proposal, people will comment on it, and at a certain point they'll vote. And enough people decide that they want to adopt it at a certain point, and it's typically defined by a block. They'll say, hey, at block number 5,550, right? As soon as that block is minted, the next block, we're going to implement the new protocol. And then at that particular point, anybody who wants to stay with the old protocol stays on the original blockchain. But the minute they introduce a change to the next block, that represents a fork in the block. And so once that happens, so let's just say at block 100, they're both the same. At block 101, they're different, right? So at block 101, there's essentially the new protocol, and that creates a whole new chain. And there's the old protocol, and that continues on the same chain. And that's what's referred to as a hard fork, or a fork in the protocol. Now, the ERC 20 standard is a change that basically said, let's make it such that all tokens are essentially using the same format, so that they can be listed on an exchange, and they can be exchanged for each other, and they can be exchanged for fiat currency. So when you hear people talking about, oh, it's an ERC 20 token, what they mean is that token is capable of being listed on an exchange. Why is that important? Because if a token can be listed on an exchange, it can be sold to the public. And if it can be sold to the public, it can be considered an investment contract. And if it can be considered an investment contract, then it can be considered a security. And if it's a security, then it's under the jurisdiction of the Securities Exchange Commission and all of their requirements. So the standard has a lot to do with how things are handled legally. There's also all sorts of different tools and products that facilitate the development of unique coins. You can, developing a coin is really not that hard. Getting it adopted, getting through all the legal review, there's a lot of things about it that are hard, but the physical act of creating a token is actually very easy. And that once ERC 20 standard was adopted, then all of a sudden we've seen a flood of different tokens and coins, of ERC tokens. If you go to CoinMarketCap, you can see a huge listing of these coins. And yeah, the rate of cryptocurrency adoption can be measured by numerous indexes and data sources, including CoinMarketCap. The things that impact whether cryptocurrency gets adopted is typically the ease of use, right? The regulatory barriers and inflation considerations. In other words, people ask themselves, does it make more sense for me to hold on to this token and have it appreciate in value, or should I go ahead and spend it because it'll be worth less in the future than it is now? And these considerations are typically what's considered in terms of whether or not cryptocurrency gets adopted and to what degree. As the barriers diminish, cryptocurrency will be more widely adopted, and that's going to limit visibility and access from financial and law enforcement institutions. We use this term tokenomics. And tokenomics is the science of the token economy. And for a blockchain token to establish and maintain economic value and potentially appreciate, an infrastructure is needed. Each token has to have its own set of features and purpose, which we'll detail in the following slides. So when we're talking about tokenomics, things that we see here in the left column under role, the right, value exchange, toll, function, currency, and earnings. Each of these roles have a specific purpose and essentially is represented by a certain feature set in the token. So a right basically is, whether or not you can use it to vote, whether you can use a product, whether you have a say in governance, right? Whether you can make some kind of contribution, whether you can access products and services, or even whether you have ownership. This is, when you see engagements that are bootstrapping, they may not have a lot of money, but what they might be able to do is essentially use a token and assign it a basket of rights, and then those rights essentially can be monetized, right, or some kind of value exchange, which takes us to the next one. Generally, the value exchange is associated with having people earning their tokens, rewarding them for certain behaviors, buying certain things or spending their assets on something. It can be both active and passive work, but the value exchange is really that you're using a token to tokenize either activities or behavior that you want to continue to see. Toll. The toll function is really about having skin in the game, right? One of the ways that you can incentivize people to behave in a way that you want them to behave is give them some reward or some penalty for things going the right way or the wrong way. And so one of the proof of stake is a common consensus protocol, because if you have stake in the project, you're more likely to behave in a way that's positive to the project. Functions, joining a network, connecting with users, incentives for usage, those are all part of the functions. Currency is really about frictionless transactions, and earnings is essentially like a profit sharing, benefit sharing distribution, things like that. All right, the next section that we want to talk a little bit about is exchanges and wallets. So the difference between an exchange or a wallet, let me hit the wallets first. Wallets essentially are something that allows you to read the blockchain and write to the blockchain. So if you want to see how many Bitcoins or how many tokens you have in your wallet, you open up your wallet. It's not like a real physical wallet. Your tokens are not actually in your wallet. They're actually on the blockchain. The wallet allows you to read the blockchain and see how many tokens you have, assuming you have the private key to do that. And it also allows you to write to the blockchain by essentially attempting to post a transaction, right? And so there's different types of wallets with different levels of security. There's a hosted wallet. So this would be if you have your wallet on like Coinbase or some kind of an exchange. Think of it like a bank. You're not actually holding your wallet. You essentially are setting up an account with like a bank or an exchange. They're actually holding your funds, your assets, but they're essentially just giving you sort of a window into it and an opportunity to move it. But your wallet is actually hosted on their platform. They actually are typically in control of that. A software wallet could be on your computer, your laptop, it could be on your phone. But with a software wallet, you're not working through a third party. you actually are writing directly to the blockchain, whereas a hosted wallet, you're using a bank or exchange. They're actually in custody of your funds. They're the ones that are actually communicating with the blockchain. They essentially have created an account with you, so that you can sort of see it, but they're actually holding it. And then a hardware wallet can be on a portable hard drive. It can be a thumb drive, and that's something that you can typically air gap, so you can unplug it and take it away from the internet. Now another type of wallet is a paper wallet. And a paper wallet is basically just kind of a printout of the private key, but it's completely separated from the internet. So a hardware wallet or a paper wallet are generally very, very safe bets. Now, the difference between a wallet and an exchange is while a wallet allows you to read the blockchain and write to it, an exchange allows you to trade tokens in cryptocurrency for fiat currency or for other tokens. So think of it as like like the New York Stock Exchange, right? If you've got Apple stock and you want to trade for Microsoft, you can do that on an exchange. If you have Bitcoin, you want to trade it for Ethereum, or you want to trade it for dollars or yen or any other currency, you can do that on an exchange. Now, there's a couple different types of exchanges, right? There's regulated exchanges and unregulated. Legally they need to be regulated. However, there is a recent sort of growth in these, what's referred to as decentralized exchanges. And decentralized exchanges are kind of hard to regulate because typically there isn't a person or an entity that's in charge of them. So Bitcoin essentially is a decentralized entity. So it would be very hard to regulate Bitcoin. There is no Bitcoin organization that essentially has control over Bitcoin. But what happens with a lot of folks is they'll create an entity that's centralized. They will attempt to say that it's decentralized in order to avoid any of the regulatory requirements, but that generally doesn't fly. I mean, if something it doesn't matter whether you call it decentralized. If it doesn't meet certain requirements, then there's going to be an expectation that it's registered. And if you operate outside of that, then you're guilty of essentially breaking the law, right? Whether it's we'll talk about the different types of laws in a minute. So here's some questions. Do you need a wallet to hold your cryptocurrency? You could leave it where you bought it, i.e. like a Cash App or PayPal or cryptocurrency exchange. Most exchanges hold crypto in cold storage, not connected to the internet. Some exchanges keep crypto in hot wallets for access to buying and selling. Most exchanges have an insurance policy against hackers. Most exchanges hold customer funds in custodial accounts at an FDIC-insured bank as a safe precaution. And even with these precautions, your account could be hacked. So leaving crypto in the custody of an exchange works for most people if you safeguard your password and other authentication. But for large quantities of crypto, your own private wallet is definitely going to be much more secure. Let's talk about organizational framework. So if you are going to have a cryptocurrency, it's important that you make some decisions in terms of who's going to manage the supply of the cryptocurrency. And this is going to take into account how is the cryptocurrency going to be created? Are you going to create it all at once? Are you going to have it mined over a period of time? Are you going to have any of it locked up, right, and maybe released at a later point in time? Remember, the value of the tokens are a function of supply and demand. So if you limit the supply, right, and the demand is fixed, then the price theoretically should go up. Right? If the price goes up, you're probably going to essentially cause more demand, potentially, right? Which I know doesn't fit exact economic terms, but it's the whole FOMO thing that goes on, right? Fear of missing out. How are you going to distribute it? So once you create the tokens and release them, who are you going to distribute them to? And are you going to dispose of them, right? Or it's sometimes referred to burn. How are decisions going to be made? Are they going to be centralized? Or are you going to do it through consensus? These are all part of the organizational framework around tokenomic considerations. And then again, as these different cryptocurrencies have evolved, an entire ecosystem has developed around them, right? Applications, organizations like the GBA and other associations, exchanges, and again, the exchanges are decentralized, they're centralized. Some of them are connected with financial institutions, some of them are brand new. There's a whole suite of financial services that have come into being. Infrastructure, so hardware wallets and networks and just all kinds of infrastructure. Investment organizations, venture capitalist funds. The World Business Angel Investment Forum is an association that we work with. Mining centers, mining pools, news and data outlets, payment processing services. I mean, a huge ecosystem around blockchain and cryptocurrency essentially has just stood up. And like I said before, some of them are regulated, some are not regulated. If you're dealing with somebody that's regulated, they probably have their ducks in a row, but you're going to pay for it. If you're dealing with somebody that's not regulated, who knows? They may have vulnerabilities, they may get hacked. It's just a wild west. Now, from a regulatory framework, in order for your ecosystem to survive, it's got to be compliant with legal, statutory, and regulatory requirements. The regulatory environment spans a wide spectrum of topics, including security, privacy, record retention, securities law, tax codes, reporting requirements, anti-money laundering requirements, and the list goes on and on. Those requirements are also imposed at various levels, including international, regional, national, provincial, or state, local government authorities. And the nature and extent of the legal and regulatory requirements regarding the transference of value on a blockchain is kind of all over the map. So you really need to have somebody who knows about this stuff at least advise you or counsel you to make sure that you don't have a knock on the door and they want to take you away in handcuffs. There's just a lot there. And this regulatory framework operates at the international, the national, and the state and / provincial level. So with regard to the international framework, you've got the European Union, the United Nations, international standards organizations, just a number of different international organizations. As far as data protection is concerned, you've got in the European Union, there's a general data protection regulation. Now, you might say, well, this is a European Union thing. It doesn't impact me in the United States or in Africa or some other place. Wrong. So what this does is it establishes a baseline for data privacy and global compliance. But if you have a business and let's say a token project, and you sell to anyone in Europe, then the GDPR applies to you. And so if you're in violation of that, you could, because of extradition laws that we have with Europe, you could be extradited to Europe and face charges, criminal charges. The same thing with U.S. securities and exchange law or money services business. If you have a business in the UK or Europe and you're in violation of U.S. laws, you could be extradited to Europe and face charges. We've got the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018. So there are these laws and regulatory requirements around the world. Just because you're not in that jurisdiction doesn't mean that they don't apply to you. Because if they're citizens, so if you got a European citizen in the United States and you violate the GDPR, right, then the fact that they're in the United States doesn't protect them. They're a European citizen, so you're guilty, right? And so it's very important that you understand the international aspect of the regulatory requirements. It's not just as simple as you might think. Oh, one more thing about GDPR. One of the things that is required as part of GDPR is the right to be forgotten. So that means that if somebody requests to have their personal data removed from your device, from your database, from your network, you're obligated to do it. and not doing it essentially is a violation of law. So there's definitely a lot there. From a federal U.S. Tax perspective, the IRS has published the following guidance. Virtual currency is treated as property for the U.S. federal tax purposes, and the general rules for property transactions apply, which means this. If you purchase Bitcoin, either for goods or for cash, then you must report the market value of the Bitcoin as income, right? Now, what you have to do is you have to identify the buy price, the sell price, the quantity, and the dates. If it appreciated if you bought it and then it depreciated, you sold it, so you basically sold it for more money than you got it, you have to report that as income. If it depreciates, you can report that as an expense. But and how long you had it also has an impact, because that determines whether it's short-term capital gains or long-term capital gains. So it's very important to understand the tax implications of cryptocurrency. If you're running an exchange, right, or you're essentially doing any kind of transfer of value, then there's a set of laws referred to as MSBs, or money service businesses. You must comply with MSB requirements. If you are going to exchange cryptocurrency for anything, then requirements are you must develop and document an anti-money laundering program for the business. You must register the business with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, and regularly renew that registration. You have to report suspicious activity to FinCEN. You have to collect, record, and verify customer identity information, and keep transaction records for 5 years. That's if you qualify as an MSB, money services business. So in 2013, FinCEN released a guidance that said Bitcoin miners were expected to be MSBs. Right now, as far as I know, Bitcoin miners, this is virtually impossible for them to do. If they are selling their Bitcoins essentially for profit, then they've got to comply with the Bank Secrecy Act. However, if they're using the Bitcoin directly for the trade of goods and services to run their business, then no. If you don't have exact records on when you bought and sold your Bitcoin in the exact quantity, then you can use something called the Cohen rule, which basically says you can take a good guess as long as there's some justification for it. So coins sold as ICOs could be utilities or securities. A security token is typically going to represent real money or debt or company ownership. Anyone who issues and markets securities to U.S. investors must register with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and many tokens that were sold in ICOs were determined by the SEC to be unregistered securities, and that violates U.S. law. I don't mean to totally scare you away, but you just need to know what you're in for. If an ICO issuer wants to sell equity tokens to the public, it must be a registered public offering, just like doing an IPO. You've got to fill out the SEC Form S1, create a perspective. It's got to be audited. It's very expensive. If an ICO issuer just wants to sell privately or only to accredited investors, then they can do it simply to a simplified offering. There's still some paperwork, but you don't have and you're not allowed to do a public solicitation. Like I said before, regardless of what you call it, if the Securities and Exchange Commission deems that you are an ICO, it doesn't matter what you call it. They're going to consider you a security. So again, just as a refresher, this is really super important. The difference between a utility and a security token. A utility token serves as a future access to a product or service and can best be compared to a gift card or software license, right? Or think of it as like a poker chip. They represent a closed loop purchasing power. Arcade tokens can get you a stuffed animal, but you can't pay your speeding ticket with that token. So an arcade token would be another example of a utility token. It's good within the arcade, but not much good outside of it. A security token, these are tokens that constitute an investment contract. The main use cases and reasons for the contributors to buy the tokens is anticipation of future profits in form of dividends, revenue sharing, or more commonly, price appreciation. So if you're selling somebody a token and you're telling them, hey, buy this token, it'll be worth more than the money in the future, that's sounding like a security. And here's the other thing. The Securities and Exchange Commission can make that determination if you communicated that in any way to potential purchasers of that investment contract. So if you make statements internal to your company, if you make a statement on a Zoom call, if you create the illusion in any way that if somebody buys these tokens from you, they will appreciate in value, then you're on thin ice, and you essentially are very close to offering an investment contract, which means I'm offering you a token that's going to appreciate in value independent of anything that you do. And that could land you into a great deal of trouble if you make any of those statements, even if you make them to internal members of your company. To determine whether something is a security or utility, the Securities and Exchange Commission established a test called the Howey test. This was actually done in 1946. There was a court case, I think it was Howey, Florida. I think Howey was the name of the place, not the person. But there were two questions that came out of that, and they both have to be answered yes for the token to be qualified as a security. The first one is a token being sold as an investment contract, and the second question, is there a person upon whom investors rely? If the value goes up based on the effort of the investors, it's not a security. But if it's going to go up based on the efforts of anybody else, it is a security. In practical use, these answers tend to be a little bit more nuanced. And what I mean by that is anything is up and to the right is more likely to be a security token than anything that is down and to the left. And so there's a great deal of gray area in this space. And then, like I said, each of the states have their own state laws. I'll just show you a couple of them. And different counties have conflicting laws. Different departments and agencies have conflicting laws. Different states and local jurisdictions have conflicting rules. It's really important to consult an attorney and navigate those waters. So in the regulatory framework, we talked about security, privacy, record retention, tax codes, reporting requirements, anti-money laundering, and know your customer requirements. All of these are in scope when you consider the regulatory framework that your ecosystem needs to live in. That does it for this module.